You know the music. You've heard the songs 1,000 times. What's going on? My girl. Midnight Train to Georgia. Signed, sealed, delivered. Stop in the name of love. These weren't just hits. They were history. But here's what nobody's really talking about right now. Every single one of these Motown icons is waiting for their story to be told on screen. And the casting decisions, they could make or break everything. Tonight, we're going deep. 10 Motown legends, 10 icons who changed music forever, and 10 actors, real, verified, discussed, who could actually bring them to life. Some of these biopics are already in development, some are stuck in Hollywood limbo, and one of them just made it to theaters. With a casting decision so controversial, the actress had to release a statement the night before opening day. You've heard the music. Now hear the stories behind it. Number 10, Smokey Robinson. Let's start with the man Berry Gordy called the greatest songwriter he ever worked with, William Smokey Robinson, Detroit, Michigan, 1959.
She said, "Son, you're growing up now."
Berry Gordy had just founded Tamla Records, the label that would become Motown, and the very first group he signed was Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. Their first big break? Shop Around, released in late 1960. Here's what most people don't know about that record. Berry Gordy woke Smokey up in the middle of the night, literally called him at 3 in the morning, because he wanted to re-record the song. He had heard it on the radio and decided the tempo was all wrong. Smokey dragged himself and the whole band back into the studio. They recorded a brand new version in the early hours of the morning. That new version went to number 1 on the R&B chart, or number 2 on the pop chart. And it became Motown's first million-selling record. The whole Motown empire, every hit that ever came out of Hitsville, USA, traces back to that early morning phone call. Now, here's who should play him. Terrence Howard. And this is where it gets interesting, because Terrence Howard has publicly admitted that Smokey Robinson personally asked him to play him in a biopic. Over dinner. You better shop around. In Howard's own words, Robinson broke his heart when he said no. Because Howard was already in talks to play Marvin Gaye, he turned down both roles. But the conversation happened. Smokey Robinson personally wanted Terrence Howard, and that is documented, verified, and confirmed by Howard himself on Bill Maher's podcast in April 2025. That's not fan casting. That is the legend himself making the call. Number 9, Marvin Gaye. This is the one Hollywood cannot figure out. The Marvin Gaye biopic has been in development for over 35 years. Let that sink in. 35 years. Cameron Crowe tried. Gary Gray tried. A limited series with Jamie Foxx was announced. Then Lenny Kravitz was cast, and Marvin's own son threatened legal action. Then Jesse L. Martin replaced Kravitz. Then filming in Belgium was suspended mid-production. And now, the biggest attempt yet. Warner Brothers acquired a new biopic titled What's Going On? Budget, over $80 million. The most money ever committed to a biopic about a black artist. The producers, Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine. The director, Alan Hughes, the man behind Menace II Society. They finally secured the rights to all of Marvin's music. His estate, his widow, Jan Gay, and Motown all signed off. But casting the lead, that is still the mountain nobody can climb. Director Alan Hughes said it himself. Marvin's voice is so singular, 90% of the film will have to use the real recordings. The song Clip You Want, I Heard It Through the Grapevine, 1968. Berry Gordy originally didn't want to release it. He actually blocked it. Marvin recorded it. Gordy sat on it. It took Motown's quality control director to convince Gordy to let it out. When it finally dropped, it became the best-selling Motown single of the entire 1960s. Over 4 million copies. Number one for 7 weeks. Gordy had almost buried one of the greatest records ever made. And the biopic needs someone who can carry that kind of weight. Much to me, you should have told. That kind of pain beneath the smoothness. That contradiction. Heavenly voice, turbulent soul. The name that keeps coming up, Michael B. Jordan. The physicality, the depth, the ability to go from charming to tormented in a single scene. This is the role that could define a generation. Listen, 90% of you watching these videos right now ain't subscribed yet. If these stories are blowing your mind, imagine what you're missing. Hit subscribe, turn on that bell, and join the R&B fans who never miss a Groove Lens upload. Number 8, Diana Ross. Here is the casting story that is making headlines right now. In March 2024, Kat Graham, known to millions from The Vampire Diaries, was officially cast to play Diana Ross in the Michael Jackson biopic, Michael.
On that you can depend and never worry.
She was excited. She posted about it. The internet went wild. Then, the night before the film opened in theaters, April 23, 2026, Kat Graham released a statement. Her scenes had been cut entirely from the final film. Legal considerations, reshoots, a complete third-act overhaul, 2 years of work. Gone. And now, the question everybody is asking. Who should play Diana Ross in her own biopic? The answer has been obvious to fans for years. Tracee Ellis Ross, Diana's own daughter. The physical resemblance is undeniable. The emotional connection is real. And Tracee has the acting range, Blackish, the high note, to bring her mother's complexity to life.
One of these old days, if you should ever miss
The song that tells Diana's story, Ain't No Mountain High Enough, 1970. She took a duet, originally recorded with Marvin Gaye, and turned it into a solo orchestral masterpiece.
arms that used to hold you so close, on the lips that used.
That version hit number one. It launched her solo career at Motown after leaving the Supremes, and it showed the world that Diana Ross wasn't just a group singer, she was a star, singular, unstoppable, on her own.
The day I set you free, ain't no mountain high.
And only someone who carries that same energy in their DNA can bring her to the screen the way she deserves. Number 7, Gladys Knight.
He's come to know.
This is the Empress of Soul. 7 Grammy Awards, 2 Billboard #1 singles, one of the greatest voices in the history of recorded music. And her signature song has one of the wildest origin stories in pop music. Midnight Train to Georgia was originally written as Midnight Plane to Houston, a song about a man who fails to make it in the entertainment industry and decides to go back home.
He's leaving.
The songwriter, Jim Weatherly, wrote it after talking on the phone with actress Farrah Fawcett, who mentioned she was taking a midnight plane to Houston. That one phrase lodged in his head. He wrote a song about it in 45 minutes. Gladys Knight's producer changed plane to train and Houston to Georgia because it felt more soulful. And it became one of the greatest songs ever recorded. It won Gladys Knight and the Pips the Grammy for Best R&B Song. It was their signature, the one record that defines an entire career. Now, who should play her? Viola Davis, the Academy Award winner, the woman who can do more with a look than most actors do with a monologue. Gladys Knight was not just a voice. She was a fighter, a survivor, a woman who navigated the music industry, personal heartbreak, financial struggles, and a complicated exit from Motown, all while delivering perfect performances every single night. That requires Viola Davis energy, nothing less. Number 6, The Temptations. In 2024, NBC aired A Motown Christmas, and The Temptations performed live on national television. But the story behind this group, it makes everything else look simple. The Temptations were 5 men from Detroit. 5 voices, 1 sound, and more lineup changes, tragedies, and feuds than almost any group in music history. My Girl was written by Smokey Robinson and Ronald White in 1964. Smokey wrote it for his then-pregnant wife, but he gave it to The Temptations. Lead singer David Ruffin recorded the vocal. That opening line, "I've got sunshine on a cloudy day," became one of the most iconic moments in pop music. The song went to number 1, Motown's first number 1 pop hit by The Temptations. And then came the heartbreak. David Ruffin's ego grew faster than his fame, as he started showing up to gigs in a limo that said David Ruffin of The Temptations, while the rest of the group arrived in a van. Berry Gordy fired him in 1968. Ruffin never reached those heights again. He died of a drug overdose in 1991. There was a TV movie in 1998 on NBC. But the story demands a feature film. The casting conversation always lands on the same name for Ruffin. Chadwick Boseman would have been the obvious choice, and his absence is felt here more than anywhere. Today, Caleb McLaughlin from Stranger Things, who is already known, young, and has the dramatic chops to carry that kind of rise and fall arc. The Temptations biopic that Hollywood hasn't made yet is one of the greatest untold stories in music. Number 5, Stevie Wonder. He was born 6 weeks premature. The oxygen levels in his incubator were too high, and it cost him his sight. Steveland Hardaway Judkins, Saginaw, Michigan, 1950. By age 11, Berry Gordy had signed him to Motown, called him Little Stevie Wonder, a child prodigy who played harmonica, piano, and drums before most kids could read. By the time he was 12, he had a live #1 record, Fingertips Part 2, a 12-year-old live at the Regal Theater in Chicago. But here's what the biopic needs to capture. When Stevie Wonder turned 21, his Motown contract expired. And instead of re-signing on the label's terms, he negotiated something that almost no artist had ever done before. Total creative control, complete ownership of his masters. Berry Gordy didn't want to give it to him. All but Stevie Wonder walked, and what did he record with that freedom? Music of My Mind, Talking Book, Inner Visions, Fulfillingness First Finale, Songs in the Key of Life. 5 consecutive albums considered among the greatest ever made. 5 consecutive Grammy Album of the Year nominations. He won 4 of them. No artist, before or since, has had a run like that. The song, Signed, Sealed, Delivered, I'm Yours. 1970, co-written with his mother, a joyful, funky declaration of love that became one of his biggest hits. And you can find it on YouTube right now. The actor who should play him, Mamoudou Athie, known for Archive 81 and Passing. He has the quiet intensity, the physical presence, and the emotional depth to play a man whose inner world was so rich, he didn't need to see it to feel it. Number 4, The Four Tops. Here is a fact that will stop you cold. The Four Tops, Levi Stubbs, Abdul Duke Fakir, Lawrence Payton, and Obie Benson, recorded together for over 4 decades without a single lineup change. 4 men, 40 years, the same 4 men. In an era where groups broke up every other year, these 4 stayed together through Motown's rise, their own commercial slumps, Levi Stubbs' declining health, and the deaths of 2 of their members.
The Four Tops.
Reach Out, I'll Be There was released in 1966. Written by Holland Dozier Holland, the songwriting team that created the Motown sound. Levi Stubbs' vocal on that record is something else. He doesn't sing it, he pleads it. There is genuine desperation in every note. The song hit #1 in both the US and the UK, and it became the defining moment of their career. But what Hollywood hasn't told you is what happened to Levi Stubbs in his final years. A series of strokes left him unable to perform. Duke Fakir, the last surviving original member, kept the group going, adding new members, honoring their legacy. When Duke buried the last of his bandmates, he kept performing, because that's what the Four Tops did. They showed up. The actor who needs to play Levi Stubbs, Nkudi Gatwa, the energy, the vocal ability, the emotional range, he can carry the joy and the grief of that story. Number 3, Berry Gordy. This is the man behind all of it, Berry Gordy Jr., Detroit, Michigan, former assembly line worker at the Ford Motor Company. He borrowed $800 from his family's savings club, and he built the most successful black-owned business in American history, Motown Record Corporation, founded January 12, 1959.
But your love don't pay my bills. I need some.
The name was simple. Motown, Detroit. And from that $800 loan, Gordy would eventually build a company worth hundreds of millions. The song, Money, That's What I Want, the very first Motown record, recorded in 1959 by Barrett Strong, written by Gordy himself and Janie Bradford. That record launched everything. It charted nationally. It proved that Gordy's Hitsville, USA studio, the little house on West Grand Boulevard, could compete with anybody. But here's what the biopic needs to get right. Gordy was not just a visionary, he was a control freak. He built a quality control department at Motown, an actual board of executives who would listen to every single record before it was released. If a song didn't pass the board, it didn't come out. He blocked Marvin Gaye's I Heard It Through the Grapevine. He almost blocked Stevie Wonder's For Once in My Life. He was overruled on both. The biopic needs to show the genius and the contradiction. The man who freed black music to the world, but kept an iron grip on everyone in his own building. In the Michael Jackson biopic, Lorenz Tate plays Berry Gordy, and the casting is inspired. But Berry Gordy deserves his own film, his own full story. And for that film, the conversation has one answer. Denzel Washington. Power. Intelligence. Charisma. Control. That's Berry Gordy. That's Denzel. Number 2. Lionel Richie. Here's the collaboration nobody talks about enough. Diana Ross, Lionel Richie. Endless Love, the title song from the 1981 film. Lionel Richie was asked to write a song for the movie with only 2 weeks' notice. He wrote the entire thing, recorded a demo, and then Diana Ross came in and they recorded it together. It hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, stayed there for 9 weeks, one of the longest runs at number 1 in pop history at that time. Richie was simultaneously the biggest songwriter in music, and still hadn't fully broken out as a solo star. He had written 3 Times a Lady for the Commodores. He had written Lady for Kenny Rogers. He co-wrote We Are the World, and then Truly, in 1982, launched his solo career to the stratosphere. 4 number 1 singles in a row, all Grammy for Album of the Year, and Hello, one of the most iconic music videos ever made, a blind girl sculpting his face out of clay. The story of Lionel Richie is not just about the hits. It's about a man who spent a decade writing other people's greatness before finally letting himself be great. That is a movie. Coleman Domingo, who just played Joe Jackson in the Michael biopic, would be extraordinary as Richie, the warmth, the quiet ambition, the man behind the songs. Number 1, Marvin Gaye.
There's too many of you crying.
We have to come back to this one, because the story of this album is the story of everything.
Mother, mother.
January 1970. A police officer was beating a Vietnam War protester at an anti-war rally. Al Cleveland, one of Marvin's songwriting collaborators, watched it happen. He wrote the chorus. Then Ronaldo "Obie" Benson of the Four Tops. He brought it to Marvin. Benson had seen the same violence, the same contradiction. Young black men dying in Vietnam while the country that sent them there couldn't even protect them at home. Marvin Gaye took the song, wrote and added verses, recorded it at Hitsville, USA in June 1970. Berry Gordy refused to release it. He told Marvin the song was too political, too risky, not commercial enough. Marvin Gaye told Gordy, "If you don't release it, I'll never record another song for Motown again." Gordy released it. "What's Going On" became the best-selling Motown single of 1971. Rolling Stone ranked the album number 6 on its list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. It changed what music could say, what an artist was allowed to speak about, what black music in America was permitted to be. And the Warner Brothers biopic, with Dr. Dre producing, Alan Hughes directing, and an $80 million budget, is the most important music film Hollywood has ever attempted. The lead is still uncast as of this year. Director Alan Hughes has said 90% of the film will use Marvin's actual voice. But the 10% that needs a living, breathing man to carry the weight of that story, that actor will win an Oscar. The name that fits: Lakeith Stanfield. The sensitivity, the strangeness, the hidden pain, the way he can play someone who is clearly brilliant and clearly fallen apart at the exact same time. That is Marvin Gaye. And that biopic, if it ever gets made, will be the most important movie about music that Hollywood has ever produced.